Welcome back to Anxious Faith. I'm James Burke. Now, this month it has been Mental Health Week. We would have seen a lot of talk around about how we look after our mental health, how we prioritise it a lot more. But it's one of those things that is interesting to think about as a Christian, because a lot of the messages we'll hear around how to look after our mental health comes from a very secular perspective. What about as Christians? How do we take on board some of that information that we might be finding out about? How do we think about things like mindfulness and meditation? So today we're going to be joined by Dr Katherine Thompson, who works for the Centre of Theology and Psychology, as well as is an author who has written a book called Christ-Centred Mindfulness. And I think he's going to help us have a really good conversation about how we start to think about mindfulness as Christians and how we can actually think about it in a way that allows us to put it into practice and help our mental health, and hopefully to help us deepen our faith at the same time as well. So Katherine, thanks very much for joining us. Why don't you just give us a short little overview of who you are and your background?
Thanks, James. I work in private practice as a mental health social worker, which many people haven't heard of that job.
Yeah.
So it's a social worker that specialises in mental health treatment.
Yeah.
And I work with young people, and I really love it because they're open to new ideas and change, and it's an exciting space to work in because you see a huge amount of change when they want to do that with their mental health. And I also work at Melbourne School of Theology, Eastern College, and next year we're rolling out a new course which is a Master of Youth Mental Health and Wellbeing, so that people can train up in this really important space so that we can support our young people in churches, Christian schools and other places. I also, as you know, write books, and I've written a few books about Christ-Centred Mindfulness, some that are just practical and a theory type book, which also has practical things in it. And just this week or recently, I've released a new book about suffering.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a huge topic. One we won't go into today, but perhaps we'll have you back for another conversation about that another time. But yeah, one of the things that has really intrigued me about this is, since I began my own mental health journey and speaking to a counsellor for the first time and learning breathing techniques and grounding techniques and mindfulness techniques kind of thing, I'm like, okay, yeah, this all seems to make sense and seems to work some of the time as well for me. I know for some people it does or doesn't to varying degrees. But I hadn't really thought about whether this is something that would interact with my faith or play into my faith or anything like that. But then, you start to think about it and it kind of has a bit of that kind of meditation, Eastern religious practice to it kind of thing. So I guess the big question is, as Christians, what do we think mindfulness is, and how does it differ from what perhaps the world tells us?
And this is the question that sent me on the journey to write the book, which is really interesting, James, because one of my close friends and colleagues, Petra, we were talking about this, and we often have conversations about how do we integrate our faith into our mental health work. And we were aware that more and more people 10 years ago, this is going back away, we're talking about mindfulness, and they were applying it to help people with their mental health. This is before it became hugely popular. Yeah. And we were questioning, well, what is it that we're teaching people? And there was very little, even for those of us that work in that space at that time, about where does it come from. So this is where the book came from. So the two of us were asking more and more questions, and we thought, well, there's no book to look up to find this out.
Let's write the book.
So I ended up writing a book, not knowing how that was going to work. It sort of is a journey, and particularly the start of the book's a journey about where does this whole concept of mindfulness come from, and what is it that we're teaching people in mental health. And what I discovered is that for a lot of the treatments that are rolled out to people in the mental health space, it's based on Buddhist mindfulness. Okay. And so the question I think that raises for us as Christians is, what do we do with that? Yeah. Is there another way to still capture the benefits of mindfulness, because it actually does help us, but do it from a Christian faith perspective?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's take maybe a couple step backs just in case people aren't necessarily as aware or well-versed in what it is. Are you happy to just give us an overview of what mindfulness is and how it does actually help us?
Yeah, so mindfulness works on your relaxation response in your body, your rest response. So even though it's not a relaxation exercise, so it's distinct from that, it still works through a similar pathway in your body. And so that's why if you practice it, it has some really important and helpful physical effects. It reduces your blood pressure, slows your heart down, slows your breathing down. But it also, in your mind, it changes the connectivity in your brain. So this is what it does is it helps you sustain attention and so that you can concentrate easier and for longer, and it also helps you regulate your emotions. So I know that's a very psychology speak, but that means that you are more aware of your emotions and you can control them, and they don't sort of become too distressing for you to cope with. So there's definitely some benefits with it.
So what are the kind of those kind of mindful techniques that would have been prescribed to people kind of thing, 10 years ago onwards?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the commonality between Buddhist mindfulness and what we would usually talk about in Christian meditation or contemplative practice are quite similar, because they use your five senses to connect to what's happening around you, to focus on something. And then the second part is focusing on something. So it's using that quiet part of your mind to just focus without focusing on your thoughts.
Yeah, so tuning into your senses. What can I hear? What can I feel? What can I smell? That kind of thing.
That's right. The difference between practicing it from a Buddhist perspective and a Christian perspective is why you're doing it, and also what you're focusing on.
Yeah.
So as a Christian, the distinctive is that you're trying to connect to your inner world and to God at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas Buddhist mindfulness has a very different approach. It's more about emptying your mind.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
it starts to make sense. So, I think one of the things that, I've been through it. I've had a counsellor take me through mindfulness exercises and we did it a lot outside in nature kind of things. So, closing our eyes, what can I hear, identifying, how many different sounds I could hear, what could I kind of feel as I walked around, those kind of things, which, like you say, it does really help you focus your mind and calm your mind. But it's interesting because I think where we're kind of told to go then, like you say, is that kind of more Buddhist background of emptying our minds. Let's not be thinking about things. Let's actually just be here and present in this moment, aware of what's going on around us, but not thinking about anything else. And is that kind of like we're giving our brains time to rest or recuperate in that kind of space?
Okay, so if we go back in time, back 500 years in Western history, this is where it all started to change, because we went through the period called the Enlightenment, and then our values and what we thought was important changed as a society, and we started to take on science and rational thinking, like logical thinking, as being more important than our mystical traditions, which actually existed in for hundreds of years. And so that's why we forgot how to engage in contemplative prayer and meditating on scripture, which we knew how to do. And so sort of we're just now, because mindfulness is a thing, we're starting to rediscover what we already knew as a church. So it's pre-existing. So
take us back then. What was kind of that original meditation or meditative thinking and contemplative prayer that we used to have that we lost along the way?
So there's quite a few different examples of it. So you don't have to just go for one technique. With our monastic tradition, there was quite a few different techniques that were developed. And Brother Lawrence, who the book Practicing the Presence of God is a well-known book, and it's been around since the 1600s, but it's quite readable and it's classic. He had a practice where he would try to go through his whole day focusing on God with his thoughts through everything he did. So through washing dishes, through praying, and there was no start or stop to his prayer time. It was more, I'm going to focus from when I wake up to when I go to bed. And he is the person where our English word mindfulness comes from.
Okay.
So it's existed for a long time, but it's sort of been captured by the popular mindfulness movement, which is a shame because we should have been out there advocating for this first, right? So
That's it, yeah. If we've theoretically known about it for a lot longer in our kind of faith traditions, then why aren't we that have been kind of saying, hey, we know about this. This is something that can help people. So, yeah, he was saying Brother Lawrence would go through his day just trying to spend every single moment, bringing God into things, focusing on God in every aspect he did. Is that then different from like a meditative time where you would meditate on the word or something like that?
So different Christian traditions do it differently.
Yeah.
So then the Ignatian tradition is about, like, there's the spiritual exercises, if anyone's been game enough to do it for the whole month. It's pretty hard in our current culture. But that is more a slightly different way of doing it, but it's a rhythm of prayer that you engage in consciously at different times of the day, and you do it in different ways, and it uses your 5 senses, your focus, and your imagination.
Ooh.
Which, if you're someone that's got a really good way of visually imagining things in your mind, that probably would work for you.
Yeah.
And you can still access those resources.
Yeah, wow.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
So there's all different ways of doing it, but they're just slight variations when you look at them. The technique's similar.
Do we know why we kind of lost these from kind of the mainstays of perhaps our Western Christian faith?
Yeah, I think one way of trying to work that out and make sense of it is to think about some of our psychological ways of trying to make sense of what mindfulness does.
Yeah.
So it talks about, one framework talks about your observing self, so the quiet part of your mind, which is what you use for mindfulness, versus the thinking or rational part of your mind, which is active all the time.
Yep.
And sometimes I describe the difference between those two states like the sky.
Okay.
So the sky is always there and it doesn't change. Like it doesn't move anywhere. It's always there. But what changes is how it looks and what's in it. So the weather and the time of day and the light all change. So it looks different. So that's like our thoughts going through our mind.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
Versus our observing mind, which is like the sky and it's just there
Always
quietly.
there. Doesn't
do
move.
anything.
Yeah. Wow, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. And I guess probably to draw that analogy out a bit more, then there's obviously different intensities of the weather and light that we have in the sky that kind of correlates to the different kind of mental states we find ourselves in.
And that's why mindfulness is so powerful, because if you've got depression or anxiety, you're often ruminating, like thinking over and over about something that's bothering you, or you're worrying about something. And so that rational part of your mind, which has got all the thoughts in it, is just overactive. So one way to quieten it down is to try and sort of develop your ability to use this quiet part of your mind so that those thoughts don't take over quite so much.
Yeah, because that's it. Like when you're in the midst of that, it feels so overwhelming. It feels like you can't actually stop your mind, and kind of like that old analogy of, tell someone not to think about an elephant and all they're going to think about is an elephant. The more you try and think about, I need to stop thinking about this, the more you just kind of keep going. And so drawing our focus away from that rational point of our mind to our observing mind helps kind of quieten that down. And like you're saying before, that we kind of see that then physiologically start to change our bodies as well, lowers our heart rate, lowers our blood pressure, that kind of thing, which is huge if you're kind of in one of those anxiety spirals. How often is this kind of suggested that people do it? Is it something like whenever they feel like it? Is it something people should be doing every day? How do practitioners usually prescribe it?
Yeah, so I think we as human beings don't like to have to do something boringly the same all the time.
Yep.
So I never think that's practical or realistic. I think it's more about understanding the concept. And once you've learnt how to do it a few different ways, then you're a bit more able to apply it in a way that suits you as a person. So I'll give you an example. I'm an outdoor person, even though sadly my job's often inside. So I'm connect to God easiest outside as well. So for me to sit quietly outside in my garden or to go to a national park or to go out for a walk outside, I'm going to be able to practice mindfulness way easier that way than if you get me to sit inside and do it. But then you also need to know which aspect of mindfulness practice is going to give you the most benefit because some of the exercises are aimed at achieving different things. One of the interesting ones is about self-compassion. Sometimes you hear about that, which is a very popular psychology way of talking about it. But I think for Christians, we would reframe that and talk about God's grace and being gracious towards others and to ourselves. And so we can actually practice it in a faith-based way, and that helps us with how we see ourselves and how we deal with some difficult and painful things that we're going through.
Yeah, it's really encouraging. And I guess, part of that is if you have to both learn the practice that's going to work best for you, you also have to learn a bit about yourself and know how you are best going to engage with that practice as well. If you're someone that doesn't like going outside as much, thinking that you have to be outside to do it is probably not actually going to be helpful. So is this something that anyone can kind of read about, pick up and start doing themselves, or is it something that they should really be taught how to do one-on-one or in a group or something like that?
It's a really good question. I think you can teach yourself, but if you it depends why you're doing it. So if you're doing it because you're struggling with a mental health problem, if you're already going to see a counsellor, it doesn't matter what their profession is, probably it's easier if they give you a start on how to do it. Don't expect all people that work in that area to understand what Christian mindfulness might look like, because they might not be trained. But you can certainly teach yourself from a book as well, and that's completely fine.
I guess one of the big things we want to get to is also looking at what actually is this Christian mindfulness or Christ-centred mindfulness. And so, I think, we'll spend a bit of time going into that and get you to kind of teach us a little bit about what that is and how we can do about that. But there's, Christ-centred mindfulness, but you also mentioned about some contemplative practices that we have back in our faith tradition that can be doing. What are the differences between those kind of things?
I haven't tried to rebrand contemplative practice as something new. That's not what Christ-centred mindfulness is really about. So we do have a rich tradition of meditating on scripture and ways to do that, and also how to pray in silence and to pray in a meditative way rather than speaking or thinking the prayers. So what I've done is try to integrate that with acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a type of therapy that uses a way of focusing on the present moment and to develop the specific exercises so they do directly address mental health issues and problems that we get stuck with in our heads, basically. So you don't need to have a mental health problem to benefit from mindfulness. So we all have problems, right? So we all need to be able to do this. So Christ-centred mindfulness helps give you skills about how to deal with difficult emotions and thoughts, but also how to integrate that with our faith so we can use those techniques to connect to God. And theologically, this is actually important because if we're using that quiet part of our mind to connect to ourselves and to something, if it's not God, I guess I raise the question about what are we opening ourselves to in that quiet, empty space. So we were talking a bit about Buddhism before. And I think that's where I would really encourage people to learn how to do Christ-centred mindfulness or any Christian contemplative tradition, because what it does, it opens us to God's Spirit. And I think that's a very important and unique thing to understand and to practice, because God transforms us through the Holy Spirit. It's not just about what we do. And then some people have described it as like holding a candle and God walking through your mind with the candle, showing you different bits that need to change. And I think that's what can happen in the quiet space, which is so important to our transformation as Christians. And the goal of Christ-centred mindfulness would be to become more Christ-like.
Yeah. And I guess, that makes, like, I'm sure other people have had this experience as well, where our brains are our minds are just so busy that we're just like, well, we're praying about things, but God, I don't hear you. I don't kind of get any sense about what it is you're trying to say into the situation or speak into the situation or reveal things to us. And, we're not all going to be in a place where we ever hear audibly from God, but that sense of that kind of in those quiet moments of our mind that we sometimes get a sense of this is what the Lord is trying to lead me into or reveal to me and things like that. Also reminds me a bit of Elijah when he goes up to the top of the mountain and God sends, a hurricane and then a firestorm and an earthquake, and Elijah's looking for God in all those things, but it's actually in the quiet whisper that God actually speaks to Elijah, which I think, just should encourage us all that, we need to actually start quietening our minds a bit more. It's often in that quiet whisper, and if our minds are just going full pelt the whole time, we're not going to hear it.
Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about it, kind of looking at, there's obviously still a benefit to mindfulness, and for people of faith, getting to a point where it's Christ-centred mindfulness, we are opening ourselves to His Spirit to be able to actually begin that transformative work in us, is something that we probably all want. We probably all should be wanting as well, in striving to grow deeper in our faith. But what does Christ-centred mindfulness actually look like? How does it practically actually do you go about doing it?
So Christ-centred mindfulness is a discipline.
Okay.
So that might sound a bit irky to some people, but it is a discipline because it requires perseverance because it's hard. And it doesn't matter how many years you've practiced it, you're still going to struggle with getting distracted because that's part of the process. So what you do is either focus on one of your senses, like what you can see, what you can hear, what you can feel, or smell or taste. Or you might focus using more than one of those senses on something. And then the idea is to keep focusing on that thing. And if you get distracted, which you will, you'll start thinking about something because it happens within a millisecond usually, is to just, the discipline comes in by persevering with just gently redirecting your focus back to what it is you're focusing on. And to accept that you're going to get distracted all the time.
So you're not a failure because you can't not
fail.
get distracted.
So that's the good news about it. So even someone that's been doing it for years will get distracted because that's part of the process. So learning it's a discipline, so it's about refocusing and persevering. The other thing that's important about it is the attitude you bring. So Jesus talks about how our attitude with our faith has to be like a little child. And I think that curiosity that little kids have and the openness to experience is exactly the attitude that we have to bring to practicing this. Another way I would see that is in our pets sometimes. Like if you have a cat or a dog and they can just get fixated on one ant outside for ages, as if it's like the most interesting thing they've ever seen. And I think that's another example of the attitude that you've got to bring to it.
That's fantastic. Now, I know a lot of this, you go into a lot more detail about this in your book, and it's probably something that's not the easiest to do on a podcast or on a video, but perhaps from your book, are you able to kind of give us an example of what one of those practices might be, kind of thing that we would go through?
Sure, I can. And I would like to maybe do one that shows how you can integrate our Christian faith into the practice, because that is partly what makes it unique.
Yeah.
So I might read it from the book for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be great.
Right, so I'm going to step you through, James, how I would teach it to someone.
Yeah, that'd be
if
great.
They were in the room with me in my private practice. Because I have a bit of a rhythm to trying to get myself into the zone.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes helpful, because then your body starts to realise, it's about to do this practice.
Yeah.
So I would shut my eyes. So I'm going to do it now, but then I'll start to read the rest of it. So I shut my eyes, and then what I do is notice what I can hear around me in my environment. So if you're in a room, you might be able to hear different noises, and just be aware of those. So you're using your sense of sound and hearing to do that. So you're already training your brain to be focused on something. And then bring your focus into yourself and just notice your breathing without changing it. Just to still yourself so that you're concentrating on something. And while you're sitting there with your eyes closed, I want you to visualise the image of a large tree. So we're going to actually use your imagination as well. And it's a huge tree, and its roots stretch under the ground, and its trunk and branches go up into the sky, and you can see the leaves above you. In the book of Jeremiah 17, it says, "Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. And in the year of drought, it's not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit." And while you're sitting there visualising this tree in your imagination, I want you now to plant your feet firmly on the ground, and imagine that they're like roots that connect you to God. As you press your feet into the floor, it's like you're connecting to Him, the one who provides living water to you. He sustains you and provides life through this water, no matter how harsh or difficult your surroundings may be. And then I want you to focus on the trunk of the tree. And imagine that your body is the trunk of the tree, and place your hands on the lower part of your rib cage. And that you can feel your breathing as you do that. So breathe all the air slowly out of your lungs until you feel uncomfortable, and then you can let it go, because there's a reflex that will automatically refill your lungs. So you can sit here and just do that for several deep breaths. So breathe all the air out of your lungs very slowly. And then let go and let your lungs refill. And just do that one more time. Now, of course, if you wanted to really get the most benefit, you keep doing that. But I'm going to move you on to looking at the top of the tree, so where the leaves and branches are above you. And I want you to use that prompt of focusing on the tree to realise that you use your 5 senses as a way of extending out to the world around you. And as you sit there with your eyes shut, what I want you to do is notice what you can hear again. So just notice all the different things you can hear. What can you feel against your body? Notice what is against your skin and what you can feel as you sit or stand while you're listening to this. And then you can open your eyes again and notice what can you see around you, and really fully engage with what you can see. And the trick now, as you finish the exercise, is to keep an awareness of God's presence with you as you are fully engaged with what is around you as you go forward.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Like you say, that's something that you would let someone spend a bit more time doing, that kind of breathing in and take them through it a bit more slowly kind of thing. Is there kind of a time you should be doing this for or aiming for?
No, I don't think there is. I think that to be realistic, we have busy days.
Yeah.
And so it's not about the benefit's not so much in the amount of time you spend, it's the practice of doing it.
Yeah, okay.
I think. Yeah.
Is there another example you've kind of got for us, another exercise you've got for us?
You can do it very different ways. One of the other ways that you can practice it that's very more mainstream, and you might have actually come across this at church, is how do you read scripture in a meditative way?
Yeah.
I know for me that someone tried to teach me when I was in my 20s, and I'm like, I have no idea what the point of this is. And then it took me to get older to actually realise, it makes sense.
Yeah. But it is interesting because, we are, like, there are the verses that say meditate on his word. And
that's right.
What does that actually mean?
So this comes out of our Christian contemplative tradition. There's no additional thing that I've added to it.
Yeah, okay,
so I'm going to just step you through what it might look like to just repeatedly focus on a passage of scripture.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
So I'm going to use Psalm 23 because it's well known.
Yep.
And if you're listening to this podcast, just shut your eyes and listen to what I'm about to read out to you, and that's all you have to do this time. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. So I'm going to read the passage a second time, but this time I want you to notice a word or a phrase or maybe an image in the passage that stands out to you, and the trick is not to choose it, but to allow God's Spirit in the silence to choose it for you and bring it to your attention. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. And surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Now I'm going to read it again. This time, I want you to reflect on the thing that came to your attention. And that word or phrase or image that stood out to you, I want you to pray and ask God to show you how it applies to your life today as you're quietly listening. Or ask God to reveal to you what he's trying to teach you through it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake, and even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. And I'm going to just read it one last time. And this time I want you to say a prayer of thanks, or maybe you might want to ask God something in response to what has been revealed to you. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Now, after reading it the last time, normally you would just sit there in silence. But I'm interested, James, like you were doing this with me, and I wonder if you feel comfortable sharing something that stood out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. The image that stood out to me was he leads me to lie down in green pastures. And I was just, thinking about that and then praying through it, the second and the third time through kind of thing, getting this sense of often, this is me in my life. It is one thing after the other with work, with podcast episodes, with kids, family, all that kind of stuff. And I find my mind just, a lot of the time, just nonstop going. And when I get to the point of taking a break, it feels like it's just that quick little top up break. It's like a sip of water on a really hot day or something like that. But the image was just like, he's taking me to this green pasture that's abundant with food for a sheep. So all my needs are there. There's still water. There's all the food I would need. And he makes me lie down to actually take the time to rest, to not just quickly grab and replenish and go again, but to actually lie down and rest in that space, not to rush it, not to try and just use it as a little pit stop. So that's a really huge encouragement and challenge for me personally to actually go, okay, yes, you tell us in your word, Lord, that you want us to come to you when we're weary and burdened, and you'll give us that rest, but also that I actually need to stop in that rest and lie down in that place that he provides for rest. Yeah.
Which is a really good segue to what contemplative tradition in our church tradition is. Yeah. It's to get us to be still and to actually listen to God. Yeah. And Christ-Centred Mindfulness is a variation of that, which is really helpful. And the thing that I find really fascinating too is if we'd have done it with a group of people, we'd have 5 different things that popped out. Yeah, exactly. And it can be such an encouragement not just to practice this as an individual, but to share in the practice with other people. Yeah, that's fantastic. Katherine, thank you so much for taking us through that and explaining it to us, but also giving us kind of those practical examples. I hope that people will be able to take from this and give it a go and try and incorporate it into their daily rhythms of life and faith and things like that, and ultimately create that space where they can begin to find that restorative and transformative space with God. So thank you so much. If people want to find out more information about Katherine's books, we'll have information in the link description below, because you've got the book Christ-Centred Mindfulness, but you've also got some shorter versions as well. Do you want to tell us quickly about those? Yeah, we've put out 2 books, and there's 2 more coming out next year, which are very small books, great for gifts for your friends, very affordable, and all they have in them is the practical how to do exercises, and so you can just pick the book up and do a page and then put it down again. So I encourage people, if they just want to practice it, they're probably the ones to go for. Yeah, fantastic. So we'll have information about that for you guys in the links, so please check that out. But Katherine, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Pleasure, James. Thanks. Thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. If it was helpful or encouraging, we'd love for you to drop a like on it and share it around. You can see way more content on our website, anxiousfaith.org, where you can listen to each episode of the podcast, find more resources, and read our blog all around mental health and faith. Be sure to also follow us on socials via the links in the description, and subscribe to our channel so you can be kept in the loop when we're dropping more content for you. Thanks so much, and God bless.